Most people believe that money is the root of all evil. They are wrong. Incompetence is the root of evil. Money is simply the scorecard, a neutral metric that tracks who is a predator and who is prey. In my world, numbers were the only things that didn't lie. People cry, people manipulate, and people offer bribes with shaking hands. But a balance sheet? A balance sheet is a confession. My name was Evan. In my previous life, I was a senior forensic auditor for one of the Big Four global firms. I was the ghost that billionaire CEOs feared most. I didn't have a social life, a wife, or a hobby. My world was defined by the flicker of a dual monitor setup and the rhythmic tapping of a mechanical keyboard. I died at 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The cause of death was sudden cardiac arrest, brought on by 5 consecutive years of 80-hour work weeks and a diet consisting of cold espresso and spite. My final thought wasn't a prayer. It was a calculation of a missing $40 million in a Cayman Islands shell company. Linus Sterling's heart stopped at the exact same second. He was cornered in the cold, white marble bathroom of the Sterling Manor, clutching his chest while his half-brother Marcus stood over him laughing. He had intentionally spiked Linus's drink with a high-dose stimulant, knowing Linus had a congenital heart murmur. It was supposed to be a prank, a way to make the family's failure look like a drug addict in front of the board of directors during the morning gala. But Marcus, an amateur in everything except cruelty, miscalculated the dosage. The prank became a terminal cardiac event. As Linus's vision blurred into a dark, terrifying static, he made one final desperate wish. It wasn't for heaven, and it wasn't for life. It was a cry for justice. If there is a God, send someone who can fight. Send someone who won't break. The two souls didn't just collide, they synchronized. I felt my consciousness being sucked through a pressurized tube, a massive data dump of 21 years of rejection, pain, and uselessness flooding my neural pathways. I felt the weak Linus let go, handing the keys of his biological machine to the vengeance Linus, me. When I opened my eyes on that bathroom floor, I didn't gasp for air. I didn't panic. I performed an immediate mental audit of my new hardware. The heart was fluttering, a messy, inefficient rhythm. I forced a deep, diaphragmatic breath, oxygenating the blood and stabilizing the pulse through sheer, cold willpower. I looked at Marcus, who was suddenly looking pale, his laughter dying in his throat as he realized his joke had nearly become a murder charge. I stood up. My knees were shaky, the remnants of the cardiac shock trying to drag me back to the tile, but I forced the system to override. I walked to the gold-rimmed mirror, seeing a pale, devastatingly handsome boy with eyes that had spent 2 decades pleading for a crumb of affection. I looked into those blue depths and deleted the plea. I kept the face. It was a high-value asset after all. "I'm here, Linus," I whispered, my voice smooth and devoid of the tremor that used to define it. It carried the weight of a man who had dismantled global cartels. "You can rest now. The auditor has arrived to collect the debt, and I'm charging 1,000% interest." Marcus was still standing by the door, his breath hitching as he gripped a silk handkerchief. "Linus, you're okay? I thought you were actually dying for a second there. Don't be such a drama queen. You always were too fragile for your own good." I turned to look at him. My gaze wasn't the watery, terrified look of the old Linus. It was the cold, analytical stare of a man who was currently calculating the prison time for reckless endangerment and premeditated assault. I saw Marcus for what he was. A poorly optimized middle manager with a gambling problem and an inferiority complex. "Marcus," I said. My voice was a flat line, a surgical instrument. "You're standing in my natural light. Move 3 feet to the left or leave. I don't care which, as long as you stop consuming my oxygen." Marcus froze. His brain, a slow-moving processor, struggled to categorize the lack of a submissive response. He tried to regain his footing, sneering as he tossed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the velvet ottoman near the bathtub. The internal audit team just finished their preliminary sweep, you brat. $10 million is missing from the Sterling Children's Foundation. The digital signature used for the wire transfer? Yours? The IP address? This room. Dad is signing the disinheritance papers as we speak. You're being kicked to the street, Linus. No more designer suits. No more chasing Xander Vane. You're going to be a ghost by sunset. In the memories of the boy who died 5 minutes ago, this was the end of the world. Linus would have fallen to his knees, sobbing and promising to do anything if Marcus just helped him. I didn't even move toward the folder. I sat at the mahogany desk and opened the high-end laptop Marcus thought I only used for social media and stalking celebrities. My fingers flew across the keys, bypassing the Sterling Group's ironclad security in exactly 84 seconds. Marcus's password was his own birth date. Inefficient. The folder, I said, pointing a single finger toward the ottoman without looking away from the screen. It's a clumsy effort, Marcus. You used a localized VPN to mask the transfer from your mistress's apartment in the North District. You chose a $10 million figure because it's the exact amount of your current margin call with the Thorn Group. You've been gambling on high-risk derivatives using company collateral, and you're losing, badly. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the hum of the laptop's cooling fan. Marcus's face went from an arrogant red to a sickly, mottled gray. What are you talking about? You're a party boy who can't even balance a checkbook. You spent $50,000 on a watch last week. I am the man who just found the back door you left in the Foundation's ledger, I countered. I stood up, adjusting my sleeves with surgical precision. But the power dynamic had shifted so violently that he actually flinched as I stepped into his personal space. I'm not the version of Linus you bullied into a heart attack, I whispered, my voice echoing in the marble bathroom like a death sentence. I am a senior forensic auditor. To me, you aren't a brother. You are a poorly hidden liability. You have exactly 60 seconds to get out of my room before I hit send on a whistleblower report to the IRS regarding your $40 million insurance fraud at the Sterling shipyard. Do you think our father will be as merciful as I am when the feds show up at the board meeting? Marcus turned on his heel and fled, his boots clattering against the marble like a retreating animal. I sat back down. The audit of my mother's life had officially begun. I spent the next 4 hours submerged in the digital remains of Sarah Sterling. The house was quiet, the servants avoiding my wing as if I were a ghost. I didn't mind. Silence is the best environment for a hunt. To the world, Sarah Sterling was a commoner who got lucky, a pretty face who managed to trap Arthur Sterling. To me, now that I had Evan's eyes and Linus's memories, she was a pioneer in polymer science who had been systematically erased. I found a hidden encrypted partition in Linus's cloud storage. It was labeled Mama's Garden. Inside were not photos of flowers, but thousands of scanned pages of research. Sarah had developed a revolutionary sustainable building material, a polymer stronger than steel, fire-resistant, and 40% cheaper to produce than standard concrete. It was the holy grail of modern construction. I traced the patent trail through the Sterling Group's subdirectories. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. My father, Arthur Sterling, hadn't just married a commoner. He had performed a strategic acquisition. He married her, forced her to sign a series of family asset agreements while she was distracted by her love and her newborn son, and then systematically transferred her intellectual property into a Sterling subsidiary. Then he let her die. He had denied her the $50,000 surgery she needed to clear her lungs, claiming the Sterling Group was facing a liquidity crisis. He denied her the surgery while he was simultaneously buying a private jet. He had extracted all the value from his asset, and when the asset required maintenance, he chose to let it depreciate to zero. The weak Linus had died because he thought he was the one who failed his mother. But as I looked at the spreadsheets, the wire transfers, and the forged patent assignments, I realized the truth. Arthur Sterling had been stealing from us for 18 years. He hadn't just neglected Sarah. He had committed intellectual property theft on a gargantuan scale. Every skyscraper the Sterling Group had built in the last decade was a monument to his fraud. I leaned back, the blue light of the laptop reflecting in my eyes. I felt a cold, sharp rage on Sarah's behalf. A woman I had never met, but whose numbers told me everything I needed to know about her suffering. "You stole from the dead, Arthur," I whispered to the empty room. "And you left the only key to your destruction in the hands of the son you treated like a failure. In my world, that's called a fatal accounting error." I looked at the clock. It was 2 p.m. I had a specific window of opportunity. I didn't need to pretend to be Linus anymore. I was going to perform a hostile takeover of the Sterling legacy using nothing but the truth and a briefcase full of evidence. I changed into a sharp, minimalist suit, midnight blue, perfectly tailored. I threw away the heavy gold chains and the sequined accessories Linus used to wear. I slicked back my blonde hair, revealing the sharp, analytical lines of my face. I didn't look like a gold digger. I looked like an executioner. Before I left, I looked at a photo of Sarah on the nightstand. "I'm auditing the debt, Mother, and I'm going to make sure the interest is paid in blood." I walked past the house staff who stared at me as if I were a ghost. I didn't look at them. I didn't need their help. I hailed a private car and gave the driver a single address: Vane Tower. Vane Tower was a 100-story monolith of black glass and chrome that dominated the Aurelia financial district. It was the physical manifestation of Xander Vane's power. Xander was the Lion of Wall Street. In the memories of Linus, he was a god to be worshipped. Linus had spent a year stalking him, sending him expensive watches, and even accidentally fainting in his path at galas just to get a second of his attention. Xander had treated him like a persistent, annoying insect. I walked through the lobby with a stride that was measured and certain. The receptionist, a woman in a $5,000 blazer, looked up and sighed the moment she saw my face. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dripping with professional exhaustion. "If you're here to see Mr. Vane, he's in a high-level board meeting. He did not receive your flowers, and no, he is not available for lunch. Please leave before I call security." "I don't send flowers," I said, setting my briefcase on the sleek marble counter. I didn't look at her. I looked at the security monitors behind her. "Flowers are a biological waste of capital with zero ROI. Tell Xander that the Sterling Group is currently in violation of the 1994 Patent Act, and I have the original filings for the Sarah polymer. He has exactly 5 minutes to see me before I take this data to his primary competitor, the Thorn Group." The receptionist's jaw dropped. She didn't have time to respond before the private elevator at the back of the hall chimed. Xander Vane stepped out. He was exactly as the memories described. 6'3", built with a heavy, powerful grace, and dressed in a three-piece suit that seemed to radiate authority. His eyes were obsidian, cold, sharp, and entirely focused on the world as a game to be won. He was surrounded by a phalanx of vice presidents and lawyers, all of whom stopped the moment they saw me. Xander's gaze swept over me. He expected the Linus who would cry, try to touch his arm, and beg for a chance. Instead, he found a man standing with his hands behind his back, eyes as neutral as a blank spreadsheet. I didn't smile. I didn't blush. I didn't even look happy to see him. I looked at him the same way I would look at a piece of equipment I was considering for purchase. "Linus," Xander said, his voice a deep, vibrating baritone that usually made people tremble. "I heard you had a breakdown this morning. Is this a new tactic? Business-themed stalking?" "I don't play games, Mr. Vane," I said. I stayed exactly 3 feet away, the professional distance for a formal consultation. "And I don't have feelings for you. The old Linus is liquidated. I'm here because your current manufacturing supply chain relies on a polymer that my father stole from my mother. In 3 days, I will be filing a lien against the Sterling Group. Since Vane Corp is their largest buyer, your entire Q3 production will be frozen by the court." Xander narrowed his eyes. The vice presidents behind him began to whisper frantically. Xander stepped closer, trying to use his height to overwhelm me. I didn't flinch. I had stared down federal agents during raids on multinational cartels. A CEO was just another variable in an equation. "You're talking about your own family," Xander hissed. "You destroy your father's legacy for a business deal? Do you think this tough act will make me like you?" "I don't care if you like me," I said, meeting his gaze with a look of pure analytical ice. Liking someone is an emotional variable that complicates data. I'm here to offer you a way to bypass the fallout of the Sterling collapse. I want the capital to buy out my father's remaining shares, and in exchange, I'll grant Vane Corp an exclusive lifetime license for the polymer. You save your Q3 and I get my revenge. It's a clean transaction. Xander stared at me for a long, tense moment. He was looking for the Linus he knew, the weak, obsessed boy. He found nothing but a man who saw the world in black and white. For the first time in his life, Xander Vane was the one being audited. "My office," Xander said, turning toward the elevator. "Now." "I have 8 minutes," I said, checking my watch. "I have to fire my father by the end of the business day, and I don't like to be behind schedule." As the elevator doors closed, Xander looked at me, his brow furrowing in a way that suggested his world had just been tilted off its axis. He didn't know it yet, but the gold digger he had spent a year avoiding was about to become the only person in the world he couldn't control. And for a man like Xander Vane, that was the most addictive thing he had ever encountered. The private elevator in Vane Tower rose at a speed that would have made a normal person's ears pop. I didn't notice. I was busy reviewing the Sterling Group's Q2 tax returns on my phone. They were a work of fiction, creative, illegal, and poorly executed. Xander Vane stood beside me, his presence filling the small space like a coiled spring. I could feel his gaze burning into the side of my head, searching for a crack in my armor. He was used to people shrinking in his presence, especially Linus. He was waiting for the moment I would turn into the shaking mess he remembered. He was going to be waiting a long time. The doors chimed and opened into a penthouse office that spanned the entire top floor. It was a masterpiece of cold, expensive minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling glass, black obsidian desks, and an unobstructed view of the city Aurelia, which looked like a circuit board from this height. "Sit," Xander commanded, gesturing to a leather chair that likely cost more than a mid-sized sedan. "I'll stand," I said, walking toward the window. I didn't look at the view. I looked at the reflection of the room in the glass, checking for cameras or recording devices. "I've spent the last 6 hours sitting. It's inefficient for blood flow. We have 7 minutes left, Mr. Vane. Let's not waste them on hospitality." Xander walked to his desk but didn't sit. He leaned against it, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "You mentioned the Sarah polymer. That technology has been the backbone of the Sterling Group's green initiative for a decade. Are you telling me that a woman who lived in a cottage on the edge of the estate was the real architect?" "I'm telling you that Sarah Sterling was the sole architect," I corrected, opening my briefcase and pulling out a single wax-sealed folder. I didn't hand it to him. I laid it on the obsidian table. My father, Arthur, suppressed her research because he couldn't stand the idea of his commoner wife being the smartest person in the room. He stole her molecular bonding formulas, filed them under a Sterling subsidiary, and then left her to die because her maintenance costs, her medical bills, didn't fit his fiscal projections. I looked Xander dead in the eye. "Every building you've commissioned in the last 5 years uses that polymer. If I file this patent claim in federal court tomorrow, the injunction will freeze every Sterling construction site. As their primary contractor, Vane Corp will face a liquidity crisis. Your stock will drop 15% in 48 hours. Xander didn't look at the folder. He looked at me. "And what do you want? If you're as smart as you're acting, you know that destroying the Sterlings destroys your own inheritance. Why would a gold digger burn his own gold mine?" "I'm not a gold digger, Xander. I'm a forensic auditor," I said. and for the first time, I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. I don't care about the gold. I care about the theft. I want a $200 million bridge loan from Vane Corp secured against these patents. I'm going to use that money to buy out the Thorn Group's stake in my father's debt. By Friday, I won't be the disgraced son. I will be the Sterling Group's largest creditor. I will own my father's chair, his house, and his legacy. Xander walked closer, his shadow falling over me. He was trying to find a trace of the pathetic Linus who used to follow him like a dog. "You're cold, Linus. Colder than I thought possible." "It's not coldness, Mr. Vane. It's a lack of emotional overhead," I replied, checking my watch. "By the way, while I was waiting in your lobby, I ran a quick cross-reference of your public logistics data. Your shipping department is losing 4.2% of its annual revenue to a phantom weight discrepancy in your South District warehouse. Someone is skimming your freight, Xander. Probably your head of logistics." Xander froze. His obsidian eyes sharpened. "My logistics are ironclad." "Nothing is ironclad to a man who knows how to read a ledger," I said, closing my briefcase. "You have my terms. You have 24 hours to decide if you want to be my partner or my collateral damage. Good day, Mr. Vane." I turned and walked toward the elevator. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for his approval. I had a schedule to maintain, and Xander Vane was currently just a secondary line item in my plan. I returned to the Sterling Manor at 5:30 p.m. The manor was a sprawling, white stone monstrosity that looked more like a hotel than a home. It was built on Sarah's stolen money, decorated with Sarah's stolen taste, and inhabited by people who had treated Sarah like a virus. As I walked through the grand foyer, the air was thick with tension. The staff hovered in the corners, whispering. They had heard about the change in the young master. "Linus, how dare you?" Eleanor Sterling, the first wife and Marcus's mother, stood at the top of the marble staircase. She was dressed in a silk gown that likely cost more than a hospital wing, her face a mask of high society rage. Behind her stood Marcus, looking pale and agitated. "You threatened my son!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You had the audacity to talk back to Marcus? Arthur is in his study. He's finishing the paperwork to have you committed to a psychiatric facility. You finally lost your mind, you pathetic little brat." I didn't stop walking. I didn't look up at her. I walked straight to the center of the foyer and looked at the massive 10-foot oil painting of Arthur and Eleanor that hung over the fireplace. "Take it down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Eleanor's screaming like a knife. "What?" Eleanor gasped, descending the stairs. "What did you say?" "This painting," I pointed to the canvas. "It's technically a business asset of the Sterling Group, as it was commissioned using the Foundation's marketing budget. As of 4 o'clock today, I have filed a temporary restraining order against the use of Sterling Foundation funds for personal lifestyle maintenance. That includes your house allowance, Eleanor. And since this painting is a misappropriated asset, it needs to be moved to a storage locker." Eleanor stopped 3 feet away from me, her chest heaving. You're insane. You have no power here. This is my house." "This house is built on a land lease that expires in 6 months," I said, finally looking at her. My eyes were flat, devoid of the fear she had spent 18 years cultivating in Linus. "A lease that is currently held by a subsidiary I just gained control of through a debt swap. Technically, Eleanor, you are currently an uninvited guest in my foyer. Marcus, I told you to get out of my room this morning. I see you're still here. That's a 15% penalty on the mercy I was considering showing you." "Linus, stop this!" Marcus yelled from the stairs. "Dad is going to kill you." Arthur Sterling is currently having a conference call with the Thorn Group, trying to figure out why his credit lines were suddenly frozen at 4:15 p.m., I said, checking my phone. "The answer is me. I am the reason his world is ending." I turned to the head butler, a man who had worked for the family for 30 years and had watched Sarah die in silence. "Mr. Stevens, please prepare a room for me in the East Wing, the one my mother used to stay in. and tell the movers to be here by 8 a.m. I'm redecorating." "Yes, Master Linus?" Stevens whispered, bowing lower than he ever had in his life. I walked past Eleanor, her expensive perfume smelling like desperation. I didn't feel a drop of satisfaction. Satisfaction was an emotion. This was just a successful audit of an overvalued asset. Back in Vane Tower, Xander Vane was not looking at the sunset. He was staring at a screen. His head of logistics was on the monitor, his face pale and sweating. "Mr. Vane, I can explain. The weight discrepancy was just a calibration error in the scales." "You're fired, Miller," Xander said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "And I've already contacted the authorities. You have 30 minutes to clear your desk before the police arrive. You should have been smarter. You should have known I'd find out." Xander cut the feed. He leaned back in his obsidian chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest. He had checked. Linus, or whatever was currently inhabiting Linus's body, was right. The 4.2% leak was there, hidden behind a series of rounding errors that Xander's own multi-million-dollar audit team had missed for 3 years. How had a pathetic party boy found it in 5 minutes in a lobby? Xander picked up the folder I had left. He broke the seal and began to read. As he turned the pages, his expression shifted from skepticism to a deep, unsettling fascination. The formulas were brilliant. The legal trail was ironclad. But more than that, the notes in the margins, written in a sharp, precise hand that didn't match Linus's messy script, were the work of a genius. Xander stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the Sterling manor. For a year, he had been the one being chased. He had been the prize that Linus Sterling would do anything to win. Xander had been bored by it. He hated weakness. He hated the way Linus would look at him with those wide, begging eyes. But the man he had met today, that man had looked at Xander like he was a useful piece of software. That man hadn't flinched when Xander stepped into his space. That man had treated Xander Vane, the most feared CEO in the country, like an afterthought. Xander felt a strange, hot prickle of adrenaline in his chest. It wasn't just business curiosity. It was the thrill of a predator who had finally found a prey that didn't just run. It fought back. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow morning, and find out what Linus Sterling likes to drink. No, find out what he needs. I want to know everything about his mother's patents. And send a car to the Sterling Manor at 7 a.m. I'm taking him to breakfast." Xander looked at his reflection in the glass. He was smiling. It was a predatory, dangerous smile. "You want a $200 million loan, Linus?" Xander whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you $1 billion. But the interest rate is going to be something you didn't account for in your spreadsheets." The next morning, the sun was barely over the horizon when the black Vane Corp limousine pulled up to the Sterling gates. I was already standing at the curb. I wasn't surprised. I had calculated a 78% probability that Xander would contact me within 12 hours of discovering the logistics leak. He was a man of action. Once he identified a superior tool, he would move to acquire it. I was wearing a sharp, charcoal gray turtleneck and a black overcoat. I looked like a shadow in the morning light. As the window rolled down, Xander's face appeared. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my outfit, his gaze lingering on the cold, neutral expression on my face. "You're early," Xander said. "I'm on time," I replied, checking my watch. "You're the one who is 5 minutes late for a 7 a.m. pickup. That's a 1% decrease in the reliability rating I've assigned to your character, Mr. Vane." Xander let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Get in, Linus." I sat across from him in the spacious back seat. The car smelled of leather and cedarwood. Xander reached into a small cooler and pulled out a bottle of high-end mineral water, offering it to me. "I heard you liked expensive champagne and sugar," Xander said, his voice low and teasing. "But you look like a man who prefers something colder. Sugar is an inflammatory agent that leads to brain fog, I said, taking the water and setting it on the table without opening it. And champagne is for people who want to celebrate things they haven't earned yet. I'm here for the loan papers, Xander, not a social call. Xander leaned forward, his knees nearly touching mine. The space in the car felt suddenly very small. I've reviewed the patents. You were right. The technology is worth billions, but $200 million won't buy out the Thorn Group. They've been aggressively acquiring Sterling debt for months. You need at least $500 million to trigger the hostile creditor clause. I know, I said, pulling a tablet from my briefcase. I was going to spend the afternoon liquidating Linus's personal trust and his mother's hidden jewelry collection to make up the difference. It's a 20% risk of shortfall, but I have a high tolerance for margin calls. I have a better idea, Xander said. He reached out, his gloved hand moving toward my face. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. He stopped just before touching my jaw, his thumb grazing the air near my skin. I'll give you the full $500 million. No interest. No collateral. I narrowed my eyes. My auditor brain immediately began looking for the hidden cost. Nothing is free, Xander. What's the catch? The catch is you, Xander whispered. His obsidian eyes were glowing with an intensity that would have made the old Linus faint. I want you to audit Vane Corp, all of it. I want you in my office every day. I want you to find every leak, every fraud, and every rounding error in my empire. I'm expensive, I said. I can afford you, Xander countered. And there's one more thing. You move out of that manor. Arthur Sterling will try to kill you the moment he realizes you've taken his company. You stay at my estate, for security purposes. I looked at him. I saw the trap. He didn't just want an auditor, he wanted to keep me where he could see me. He was trying to acquire me like a rare asset. I'll accept the audit position for a 5% equity stake in the recovered revenue, I said, ignoring the security offer for now. As for the estate, I'll consider it once the Sterling boardroom is under my control. I have a father to bankrupt today, Xander. I don't have time for a housewarming party. Xander leaned back, a dark, satisfied look on his face. You're a terrifying creature, Linus. I think I'm going to enjoy watching you work. Don't enjoy it too much, I said, opening the water and taking a sip. I might find a leak in your heart next, Mr. Vane. And I doubt you'd like the restructuring I'd propose for that. The car moved through the streets of Aurelia toward the Sterling boardroom. I wasn't thinking about Xander's intensity or the way he looked at me. I was thinking about the fact that Arthur Sterling's morning coffee was about to taste very much like an audit. The Sterling Group headquarters was a building of marble and arrogance, but today, the air inside smelled like a funeral. I walked through the lobby at 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the emergency board meeting was scheduled to begin. Beside me, Xander Vane walked with a stride that made the security guards instinctively pull back. He wasn't just here as an observer. He was here as the bank, and the bank was looking for blood. You're remarkably calm for a man about to commit patricide, Xander murmured, his voice low enough to vibrate against my shoulder. He was walking too close to me, intentionally violating my personal space. To a normal person, his presence was a heavy, suffocating weight. To me, he was just an obstacle in my peripheral vision. Patricide requires an emotional connection to the victim, I replied, not breaking my stride. I'm simply performing a debt for equity swap. My father isn't a parent. He's a toxic asset that has been overvalued for 18 years. It's time for a market correction. Xander's eyes flashed with a dark, appreciative amusement. You really don't feel anything for him, do you? No lingering resentment? No desire for him to apologize? Apologies don't fix balance sheets, Xander, and I don't waste my cognitive bandwidth on resentment. It has a 0% return on investment. We reached the top floor. The double mahogany doors of the boardroom were guarded by Arthur's private security. They looked at me with the usual condescension, but when their eyes landed on Xander Vane, they turned pale. I pushed the doors open. The room was filled with the Sterling board of directors. 12 men in gray suits who had spent decades helping Arthur hide his tracks. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling. He looked older than he had yesterday. His skin was the color of parchment, and his hands were clenched so tightly on the table that his knuckles were white. Marcus sat to his right, looking like a man awaiting the gallows. "Linus," Arthur growled, his voice raspy. "How dare you bring a competitor into this boardroom? Security, remove him. This is a family matter." "Actually, Arthur," I said, walking to the empty chair at the far end of the table and sitting down. I didn't wait for an invitation. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, sliding them across the polished wood. "This isn't a family matter. This is a creditors' meeting. And since I now hold 51% of your outstanding short-term debt through the Sarah Directive Fund, I am technically the person you work for." The room went deathly silent. Arthur picked up the top document, his eyes scanning the notice of default. You bought the Thorn debt? With what money?" Arthur's voice cracked. "The money you stole from my mother," I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "I've spent the last 12 hours liquidating the offshore assets you thought were untraceable. I've also filed a formal claim with the Patent Office regarding the Sarah polymer. Your company's primary asset is currently under a federal freeze. You are illiquid, Arthur. You are insolvent, and as of 9 a.m., you are fired." Arthur didn't scream. He didn't even stand up. He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Marcus, however, was not so quiet. "You can't do this," Marcus yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "You're a brat. You're a gold digger. You spent your life chasing men and wasting our money. You don't know the first thing about running a company." I didn't even look at him. I looked at the board of directors. "Gentlemen, the internal audit I conducted last night revealed that Marcus has been skimming $2 million annually for marketing expenses that actually went to his gambling accounts. If you don't vote to remove him and Arthur today, I will release the full audit to the SEC. You will all be charged as co-conspirators. I'll give you 30 seconds to decide if you want to keep your pensions or your loyalty to a failing patriarch." The directors didn't even wait for the 30 seconds. One by one, they raised their hands. "The motion passes," I said, marking the ledger. "Arthur, you have 1 hour to clear your office. The manor has already been placed under a lien. You and Eleanor will be moved to a service department in the suburbs. It's a modest space, comparable to the one you forced my mother to live in for 18 years. I believe you'll find the efficiency of the space quite educational." Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, he saw the man inhabiting his son's body. "Who are you?" he whispered. My son didn't have eyes like that. He was weak. He was soft. "Your son died when you refused to pay for his mother's surgery," I said, standing up. "I'm just the auditor who came to balance the books." I turned to Xander, who had been leaning against the wall, watching the entire execution with a look of terrifying hunger. He wasn't looking at the board. He wasn't looking at the money. He was looking at me like I was the most exquisite thing he had ever seen. "Meeting concluded," I said to Xander. "I have 3 hours of filing to do. You can see yourself out." Xander didn't move. He walked over to me, his shadow eclipsing the table. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from my neck. "You're done here, Linus. My car is outside. You're moving into my estate today. Arthur is a cornered animal. He'll try something desperate. I'm not leaving you here." "I have my own security," I said, stepping back to maintain the 3-foot professional boundary. "You have my security now," Xander countered, his voice dropping into that dangerous, possessive tone. "Don't audit my protection, Linus. You won't like the results if you find a vulnerability." I looked at him. I saw the obsession in his eyes, but I categorized it as high-level resource protection. As a straight man, I didn't see his intensity as a romantic gesture. I saw it as a CEO protecting a vital asset. "Fine," I said, closing my briefcase. "But I'm charging you for the travel time. My hourly rate for auditing Vane Corp just went up by 20%. Xander let out a low, rumbling laugh. "I'll pay whatever you want. Just get in the car." The Vane estate was not a house. It was a fortress of black stone and glass carved into the side of a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was a masterpiece of cold, modern engineering. There were no gilded frames here, no velvet curtains. Everything was steel, obsidian, and silence. "This is the West Wing," Xander said as we walked through the foyer. "It's entirely yours. It has a private server room, a library, and a view of the Atlantic. My suite is in the East Wing. There is a 50-meter gap between us. Does that satisfy your professional distance?" "It's acceptable," I said, scanning the room. The lighting was optimal for reading ledgers, and the desk was a custom-built ergonomic masterpiece. "But I'll need a dedicated fiber optic line. I'm currently tracing a secondary embezzlement trail that leads to the Thorn group, and I can't afford a lag in the data stream." Xander walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking a gazelle that had forgotten to run. He stopped just inside my space. "You've been working for 18 hours, Linus. Even a machine needs to cool down. I've had my chef prepare a meal. You're eating with me." "I have a protein bar in my briefcase," I said, not looking up from my phone. "Eating is a time-consuming variable. I can multitask while I audit the Vane Corp Q3 projections." Xander reached out and snatched the phone from my hand. He held it high above his head, forcing me to look up at him. "Mr. Vane, that is a breach of professional conduct," I said, my voice flat. "Return my hardware." "Eat with me, or I'll have my IT team block your MAC address from the house server for the next 6 hours, Xander said. He was smirking, but his eyes were serious. He was testing me, trying to find a way to break my cold, logical shell. I sighed. "That is an inefficient use of your power. But fine. 20 minutes. No small talk. We only discuss the 4% logistics leak and the Thorn Group's current market position." "Deal," Xander said, but the look on his face suggested he had no intention of talking about logistics. The dining room was an expanse of black marble. The meal was a perfectly seared steak and roasted vegetables, high protein, low glycemic index. Xander watched me eat with an intensity that would have made a normal person choke. "You're remarkably skilled at ignoring me," Xander said after 5 minutes of silence. "Most men would be terrified to stay in this house, or they'd be trying to find a way into my bed. You're the only one who has asked for a fiber optic line." "I'm a straight man, Xander," I said, cutting a piece of steak with surgical precision. "I don't find your brooding CEO persona effective. You're a powerful man, and I respect your capital, but you aren't a data point I'm interested in pursuing. I'm here to do a job. Once the Sterlings are erased and Vane Corp is optimized, I'll be moving on to my next project." Xander's hand tightened on his wine glass until I heard the crystal groan. "Moving on? You think I'm going to let you just walk away after you've seen the inside of my empire? After you've become the only thing I think about when I wake up?" I looked at him, my expression neutral. "Obsession is a psychological malfunction, Xander. It leads to poor decision-making. You should audit your emotional state. It's affecting your ROI." Xander stood up, his chair scraping against the marble. He walked around the table and leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the cedarwood and the faint scent of expensive wine. "I don't care about the ROI, Xander whispered, his voice like a velvet growl. "I've spent my life winning things that were easy to catch. You're a challenge I haven't even begun to solve. You say you're straight? Fine. I'll just have to be the exception that breaks your logic." "Good luck with that," I said, wiping my mouth with a silk napkin. "You have 4 minutes of my time left. Do you want to talk about the Thorn group, or are we done?" Xander stared at me, a mixture of fury and absolute fascination warring in his eyes. He realized that for the first time in his life, His money, his looks, and his power were useless. He had to earn my respect, not buy it. "We're done for tonight," Xander said, his voice tight. "But Linus, the audit has just begun, and I'm much more thorough than you think." I returned to the West Wing and spent the next 6 hours submerged in the digital world. I was tracing a series of ghost transfers, money that was leaving the Sterling accounts and vanishing into a dark pool exchange in Singapore. It was the Thorn Group's signature. They were trying to hide the evidence of their collusion with Marcus before I could freeze the accounts. I was so deep in the code that I didn't hear the door open. I didn't notice the cold air until a heavy cashmere blanket was draped over my shoulders. I flinched, my hand instinctively going to the letter opener on the desk. Xander was standing behind me. He didn't look like a CEO right now. He was in a black silk robe, his hair slightly damp from a shower. He looked human, vulnerable. "It's 3 a.m., Xander said softly. "The server room is climate-controlled at 60 degrees. You're shivering and you didn't even notice." "I'm fine," I said, trying to pull the blanket off. "I'm close to a breakthrough. The Thorn Group is using a tiered encryption that—" Xander's hands landed on my shoulders, pinning the blanket in place. His touch was warm, distractingly warm. "The data will be there in the morning, Linus. Your heart rate is elevated and your pupillary response is sluggish. You're entering a state of diminishing returns." "I don't need a lecture on my own physiology," I snapped, but my voice was weary. "I died at my desk in my last life, Xander. I know my limits." Xander froze. "What did you just say?" I realized my mistake. The straight Evan had let a slip of the tongue occur through exhaustion. "I meant, I almost died from overwork in the Sterling offices. It's a figure of speech." Xander didn't let go. He leaned down, his forehead resting against the back of my neck. I could feel his heartbeat through the cashmere. It was fast, frantic. "Don't do it again," Xander whispered. "Don't die on me. I just found you." I sat there, frozen in his grip. As a straight guy, this level of intimacy was uncomfortable, but as an auditor, I recognized the genuine fear in his voice. Xander Vane was a predator, but he was a predator who had found something he was terrified of losing. "I'm a variable you can't control, Xander," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "And you shouldn't get attached to variables. They change." "Then I'll just have to make sure you're a constant," Xander said. He stood up, pulling me out of the chair. He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't try to pull me into his bed. He just led me toward the oversized sofa in the corner. "Sleep, or I'll have the IT team pull the plug on the house power. Your choice." I looked at him. I saw the dominance, but I also saw the care. I realized that if I wanted to keep working, I had to satisfy his protection protocol. "Fine," I said, sitting on the sofa. "But stay on your side of the room. I don't like distractions." Xander sat in the chair across from me, watching me with those obsidian eyes until I finally drifted off into a dreamless, logic-filled sleep. The audit of the Sterling Group was nearly complete. But as I fell asleep, I realized that the audit of Xander Vane's heart was going to be the most complex project of my life. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I had the right tools to solve it. In the world of high-level software development, there is a term called feature creep. It's when a project becomes so bloated with unnecessary functions that it eventually collapses under its own weight. The next morning, as I sat in Xander's private archive at 4 a.m., staring at the Thorn Group's Singaporean servers, I realized that Julian Thorne was the literal embodiment of feature creep. He hadn't just built a predatory lending firm. He had built a $2 billion house of cards. He was using ghost credits, fake capital generated through a series of circular trades, to keep his stock price inflated while he systematically dismantled his competitors. And Arthur Sterling had been his most willing victim. "You're up early?" a voice rumbled from the shadows. Xander walked into the light of my monitors. Julian Thorne just moved $400 million into an offshore escrow account, I said, my voice raspy but steady. He's preparing for a poison pill maneuver. He's going to trigger a forced liquidation of the remaining Sterling assets at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If he succeeds, the Sterling Group won't just be bankrupt, it will be erased. And the Sarah Polymer patents will be seized as part of the collateral. Xander stepped closer, his hand landing on the back of my chair. The heat from his body was a distraction I hadn't accounted for in my current energy budget. I know. My spies in Singapore confirmed the movement an hour ago. I'm already preparing a counterbid. We can outspend him, Linus. No, I said, turning to look at him. Outspending him is an inefficient use of capital. It leads to a bidding war that damages the asset. I'm not going to outspend him, Xander. I'm going to delete him. Xander's eyes sharpened. Explain. Thorne's entire operation relies on the Project Nemesis server. It's where he hides the metadata for his circular trades. If I can inject a ghost script into his root directory during the board meeting, I can reveal his true liquidity live on the global exchange ticker. He won't have the money to bid because his assets will be frozen by the SEC before he can hit the confirm button. Xander leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could feel the cold intensity radiating off him. The lion was ready for the kill. It's high risk, Linus. If you fail, Thorne will sue you for corporate espionage. You'll spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. I don't fail, Xander, I said. I audit, and Julian Thorne's life is currently out of balance. Xander reached out, his thumb grazing my lower lip. It was an intimate gesture, one that a straight man should have recoiled from, but I found myself staying still, calculating the ROI of his affection. If we do this, if we win, what happens to you? I move to my next project, I said, my voice a whisper. Xander's grip on the chair tightened. Not a chance. You're the only variable I haven't been able to solve, Linus. I'm not letting you go back into the wild. You're staying right here, in my ledger permanently. 9 a.m. The Sterling boardroom felt like a pressure cooker. Julian Thorne sat at the head of the table, looking like a shark in a $5,000 suit. He had a smug, jagged smile on his face as he looked at the directors. Arthur Sterling sat in the corner, a broken man, watching his legacy being fed to the wolves. The terms are simple, Julian said, his voice dripping with false concern. The Thorne Group will assume all Sterling liabilities in exchange for the total transfer of the Sarah Polymer patents. Sign here, Arthur, and you can walk away with enough of a pension to live comfortably in the suburbs. Arthur reached for the pen, his hand shaking. Don't sign that, Arthur, I said, pushing the doors open. The room snapped toward me. I was dressed in a black-on-black suit, my blonde hair slicked back, my eyes reflecting the cold fluorescent lights of the boardroom. Behind me, Xander Vane stood like a shadow, his presence alone enough to make the air in the room drop 20 degrees. Linus, Julian sneered, the little gold digger speaks. This is an adult meeting, boy. Go back to your shopping bags. Julian Thorne, I said, walking to the center of the table and opening my laptop. I didn't look at Arthur. I looked at Julian. Current liquidity, -$2 billion. Current legal status, federal fraud. Current career outlook terminated. I hit a key. The massive projector screen on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't showing a presentation. It was showing Julian Thorne's private shadow ledger in real time. The red numbers were cascading like a waterfall. $400 million. $800 million. $1.2 billion in unauthorized margin calls. What is this? Julian screamed, surging to his feet. This is a fabrication. This is illegal. This is an audit, I said, my fingers flying across the keys. I've just rerouted your ghost credits back to their origin in the Singapore exchange. The SEC has been pinged. The FBI is currently in your lobby. And the poison pill you planned? I've converted it into a kill switch for your company's trade license." The room went into a frenzy. The directors were shouting. Julian was lunging for me, his face a mask of primal fury. He never reached me. Xander was across the room in a blur of motion. He caught Julian by the throat, slamming him back against the mahogany table with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. "Touch him," Xander hissed, his voice sounding like two glaciers grinding together. "And I won't wait for the police. I'll liquidate you myself." I didn't stop. I didn't look up from the screen. "Arthur, the Sarah Polymer patents are now legally protected under a trust I've established in my mother's name. The Sterling Group is being restructured into the Sarah Foundation. You are no longer the chairman. You are no longer an owner. You are a footnote." Arthur fell back into his chair, his eyes wide with a pathetic, hollow fear. He had been outplayed by the son he had tried to bury. "Audit concluded," I said, closing my laptop with a satisfying click. The aftermath was a logistical masterpiece. Julian Thorne was led out in handcuffs, his empire collapsing in hours. Arthur and Eleanor were moved to a modest two-bedroom apartment, exactly like the one Sarah had been forced to live in. Marcus was currently being processed for financial fraud. The Sterling Group was gone. In its place was a sustainable engineering firm that honored Sarah's genius. I was sitting in the west wing of the Vane estate, looking at a stack of sentencing papers. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, casting a long orange glow over the room. "You did it," Xander said, walking into the room. He had been my shield during the entire war, protecting me from the physical threats while I handled the digital ones. "The numbers are in balance," I said, leaning back in my chair. My heart gave a strange, sharp stutter. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion finally catching up to me. Xander was beside me in an instant. He didn't ask permission. He pulled me out of the chair and into his arms, his grip tight and possessive. He carried me toward the sofa, sitting down and keeping me in his lap. "Xander, this is a breach of—" "Shut up, Linus," Xander whispered, burying his face in my neck. He was shaking. The most powerful man in Aurelia was trembling against my skin. "I thought I lost you. When Thorn lunged at you, I realized I don't care about the company. I don't care about the patents. I just want you to keep breathing." I stayed still. As a straight guy, I should have been looking for an exit. But as Linus, the boy who had died alone in his room because of Marcus's foolish prank, and with Xander, the lifelong love he had always wanted, I let the warmth of Xander's body flow through me, fulfilling Linus's last wish. Now Evan and Linus were one soul, and for the first time, we experienced a positive variable. "I'm a difficult asset to manage, Xander," I whispered. "I like a challenge," he replied. He pulled back, his obsidian eyes searched mine. "You say you're straight. You say you're just a ghost in a machine. Fine, but you're my ghost, and I'm never letting you find a different machine." He leaned down, his lips brushing against mine. A soft, tentative question. I didn't pull away. I calculated the risks, I calculated the rewards, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, the numbers told me to stop auditing and just start living. I kissed him back. It wasn't an emotional explosion. It was a deliberate, logical decision to accept a lifelong partnership. "The interest rate on this is going to be astronomical, Xander," I murmured against his lips. "I'll pay it," he breathed. "Every single day. The island is waiting. I've already moved our lives there. Vane Corp has a new CEO. I'm just a man with a very expensive hobby now." "What hobby?" I asked, a small smile touching my lips. "You," Xander said, his gaze turning possessive, soft, and deeply romantic all at once. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure your heart never has a reason to skip a beat unless I'm the one causing it." 1 year later. The Mediterranean sun was warm on my skin. I was lying on a lounge chair on our private beach, a glass of chilled mineral water in my hand. Xander walked toward me from the water, looking like a god in the afternoon light. He sat on the edge of my chair and pulled me into his lap, his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my back. "You're far away again," Xander whispered, kissing the line of my jaw. "What are you auditing now?" "The ROI of this vacation," I said, leaning back into his warmth. "And the boy who used to live in this body." "He didn't die, Linus," Xander said, his voice serious. "He just waited for the right version of himself to show up and save him. I love both of you, but I'm glad the auditor stayed." I looked out at the turquoise waves. The weak Linus and the forensic auditor were no longer two separate souls. We were one. He was the part of me that suffered so I could learn to be strong. I was the part of him that fought so he could finally be loved. I turned in Xander's arms and kissed him, a deep, certain, and long-term merger. "The ledger is closed, Xander," I whispered. "And for the first time in my life, I'm not looking for a mistake. I'm exactly where the numbers said I should be." Xander grinned, pulling me closer as the sun set over our paradise. "Pure profit, Linus," he breathed. "Pure profit." Sarah's legacy. In the center of Aurelia, a new building stands. It is made of a shimmering, sustainable polymer that is stronger than steel. At the entrance is a simple plaque, the Sarah Sterling Center for Engineering, in honor of a mother's genius and a son's logic. In the basement of the local district office, a man named Arthur Sterling spends his days doing the filing he once forced others to do. He has no desk. He has no gold. He has only the numbers. And the numbers, as Evan always said, never lie. The end.